I never thought one Valentine's Day could break my whole marriage. But it did. He didn't just forget the day, he forgot me. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 33 years old and work as an elementary school teacher in Oregon. My husband, Ethan, is 36, a corporate project manager, smart, charming, and the kind of man people naturally like. For years, I thought we had something special. We'd built a quiet, simple life together. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and our small traditions. One of them was Valentine's Day. It had always been our day. But lately, something had changed. Ethan wasn't cruel or loud about it. He was just distant. Little things that used to matter to him didn't anymore. He stopped asking about my day. Stopped hugging me when he came home. His smile, once warm, now felt like a formality. I told myself he was just stressed at work. I wanted to believe that because the truth would have hurt more. As Valentine's Day came closer, I tried to bring back some spark. I wanted to remind him that we were still us. I started planning early. His favorite meal, a candlelit table, a simple evening at home. Nothing fancy, just something real. I even wrote him a letter. It wasn't long, just a few honest lines about how much he meant to me and how I still believed in us. I wanted to tell him I missed the man I married, but the closer it got to the 14th, the colder he became. He stopped talking about plans altogether. When I mentioned Valentine's Day, he brushed it off like it didn't matter anymore. "It's just another day," he said one night, scrolling on his phone. I tried not to take it personally, but deep down, I felt something cracking. I still went ahead with my plans. I told myself that maybe he was just tired or distracted, and maybe a warm meal and a loving note would remind him of who we were. That morning, I packed his lunch and slipped a little heart-shaped note inside, like I used to do when we first got married. He didn't say a word about it. That night, I set the table early, candles, soft music, the smell of garlic and butter filling the house. I looked at the clock again and again, waiting for his car to pull up. I imagined the look on his face when he saw the effort I'd put in. I wanted to believe it would fix something, but something inside me already knew. The silence in that house felt heavier than ever. Something was wrong, something much deeper than a missed Valentine's dinner. Valentine's morning came cold and gray, but Rachel woke up early, wanting to make it special. She moved quietly so Ethan wouldn't wake. She made his favorite coffee, poured it into a travel mug, and placed it by the door with a small note that said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Love, R." Before he left, she slipped another note under his windshield wiper, a little paper heart she'd drawn by hand. She stood by the window, watching him drive away, hoping he'd see it and smile. But he didn't even glance back at the house. She told herself he must have been in a hurry. She refused to let it ruin her mood. All day at school, she felt nervous and excited, thinking about the dinner waiting for him. She had planned every detail carefully. The red dress he once said made her look like love itself, hung in her closet, freshly ironed. She'd made his favorite meal, creamy pasta, garlic bread, and a bottle of wine they'd saved from their anniversary. She wanted everything perfect. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. The candles flickered softly on the table. The house smelled warm and inviting. Rachel kept glancing at the clock, listening for the sound of his car in the driveway. 7 came, then 8. Still nothing. She sent a text. "Everything okay? Dinner's ready." No reply. Her heart sank a little, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe work had gone late. Maybe there was traffic. She poured herself a small glass of wine and waited. The food was still hot. She could reheat it if she had to. By 9, her stomach hurt from worry more than hunger. When Ethan finally walked through the door, it was after 10. He looked surprised to see the candles still burning. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and there was a faint scent of expensive perfume around him, not hers. Rachel stood up quickly, forcing a smile. "I was starting to get worried. You didn't answer my texts." He shrugged, tossing his keys on the counter. "Yeah, it was a long day. Meetings ran late. I made dinner," she said softly. "Your favorite." He barely looked at the table. "I'm not that hungry. Maybe later." The words hit her like a quiet punch. She nodded, pretending it didn't matter. "Okay." He disappeared into the living room, scrolling through his phone, his face lit by the screen instead of candlelight. Rachel sat down at the table alone. The pasta had gone cold. The wine tasted bitter. She watched the flame of the candles until it flickered out, the smell of melted wax filling the room. She didn't even eat. She just sat there, feeling like a ghost in her own home. When she finally went to bed, Ethan was already lying there, still tapping through email. She slid under the blanket beside him, her eyes burning but dry. He didn't notice. She turned away, pressed her face into the pillow, and let the tears come quietly. The next morning, Rachel woke up feeling empty. The night before still echoed in her mind, how easily Ethan had brushed off everything she'd prepared, how his voice had no warmth left in it. She watched him get ready for work, moving quickly, avoiding eye contact. He showered longer than usual and sprayed on a new cologne she didn't recognize. When she asked about it, he said he'd picked it up at the office and changed the subject. After he left, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold cup of coffee he'd left untouched. Something inside her whispered that something wasn't right. It wasn't just a bad mood or stress. This felt different, like a wall had been quietly built between them, and she didn't even know when it started. At school, she tried to stay focused on her students, but her mind kept drifting. Every time she thought about his distant eyes and the perfume that wasn't hers, her stomach turned. During lunch break, she called her best friend Laura. Laura had known her since college. She listened quietly while Rachel talked, her voice trembling. "He's just been off," Rachel said. "I can't explain it, but I feel like he's hiding something." Laura sighed. "Ratch, you've been making excuses for him for months. If he's pulling away, there's a reason. Don't ignore it." Rachel hated hearing that, but deep down, she knew Laura was right. That evening, she waited for Ethan to get home. He walked in, same as always, polite, distracted, tired. After dinner, he said he needed to finish some reports and went to his study. When she peeked in, he quickly closed his laptop. Something inside her snapped a little, not out of anger, but fear. She wanted to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Later that night, when he was asleep, she quietly picked up her phone and opened their joint bank account. She told herself she was just checking to make sure the bills were paid. But as she scrolled through the transactions, her hand froze. There it was, a charge from Laurel and Finch Jewelers, dated February 14th. A luxury jewelry store. The same day he'd told her he was working late. Her heart started pounding. She didn't own any new jewelry. He hadn't given her anything in months. She clicked on the transaction again, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. Rachel set the phone down, her hands shaking. The truth sank in slowly, painfully. He had bought something beautiful that day, just not for her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't breathe. The house was silent, but in that silence, she heard everything. The distance, the lies, the quiet betrayal she had tried not to see. That night, she didn't cry. She just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, realizing the man beside her might already belong to someone else. The next morning, Rachel decided she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She needed to know the truth, even if it broke her. While Ethan sipped his coffee, scrolling through his phone like usual, she tried to sound casual. "Did you happen to buy anything special this week?" she asked softly, pretending to tidy the counter. He looked up for a second, then smirked. "Oh, that? It was just a client gift. You know how my company likes to keep our partners happy." Rachel nodded, forcing a small smile. "Of course. Makes sense." Inside, her heart sank. His voice was too easy, too smooth, like he'd rehearsed that answer. She didn't push it further. She just said, "Drive safe," when he left for work and closed the door behind him. All day, she couldn't shake the uneasiness. The perfume, the distance, the jewelry, everything pointed to something she didn't want to believe. Her stomach felt tight with dread. She tried to focus on her students, but her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan's calm face and that easy lie. By evening, she couldn't sit still. Her gut was screaming at her to stop ignoring the truth. When Ethan texted that he'd be home late again, she stared at the screen for a long time, then grabbed her coat and keys. It was cold outside. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every thought louder. She drove toward his office, her heart pounding. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, only that she needed to see. When she reached his building, it was mostly dark, except for a few lights on the top floor. But Ethan's car wasn't there. She almost turned back, until she noticed his familiar black sedan parked a few blocks away, in front of a small restaurant she recognized. Her hands trembled as she parked across the street. Through the big glass window, she saw him, Ethan, sitting at a corner table. Across from him was a woman she'd seen once before at his company party, Ava, the young co-worker he'd mentioned a few times. They were laughing. Ava's hand rested on his, and he didn't pull away. There was a small jewelry box sitting on the table between them, open. Inside, a delicate bracelet sparkled under the restaurant lights. Rachel didn't need to guess who it was for. She felt her chest tighten, not with anger but deep, heavy sadness. This was the proof she hadn't wanted. She raised her phone and took a few quiet photos, her fingers shaking. The screen blurred as her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, she thought about walking in, confronting them, making a scene. But then she stopped. That wasn't who she was. She knew shouting wouldn't fix what he'd already broken. Instead, she took a deep breath, wiped her face, and walked back to her car. As she drove home in silence, she realized something. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It's calm. It's walking away while they're still pretending nothing's wrong. Rachel woke up the next morning feeling strangely calm. The tears had dried, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt desperate for answers. She already knew the truth. Ethan had made his choice. Now she had to make hers. When he came downstairs, she greeted him like nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said softly, pouring him coffee. He smiled faintly, unaware that the woman standing in front of him had seen everything the night before. She kept her tone light, asked about his day, laughed at his small talk. On the surface, she looked the same. But inside, she was done being the woman who begged for love. Ethan seemed relaxed, maybe even relieved, thinking she hadn't noticed anything. He talked about a business trip coming up and how busy he'd been at work. Every word sounded like another lie layered on top of the last. Rachel just nodded and smiled, keeping her eyes gentle, her voice steady. He had no idea she was already planning her next move. That evening, she cooked dinner as usual. She played soft music, poured him a glass of wine, and listened while he talked about his day. Every detail was carefully measured, practiced. She could tell now how easily he lied. It rolled off his tongue without hesitation. Watching him, she realized something painful but freeing. The man she fell in love with didn't exist anymore. Later that night, when he leaned in to kiss her goodnight, she met his eyes and saw nothing familiar left in them. They were cold, distant, like he was a stranger sharing her bed. She forced a small smile and whispered, "Good night." As he turned away, she thought to herself, the man I married doesn't exist anymore. After he fell asleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dark window. Her reflection looked back at her, tired but stronger. She opened her laptop and began quietly saving copies of their financial documents, bank accounts, insurance, property record. She created a folder and labeled it simply, R. The next day, she met with a divorce attorney recommended by Laura. The office was quiet and smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Rachel's hands trembled as she explained her situation, but her voice didn't break. The lawyer listened carefully, offered calm advice, and promised to help her protect what was hers. Afterward, Rachel walked out of the building into the cool air. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was taking control. At home, she kept up her act. She smiled when Ethan walked through the door, cooked dinner, and asked about his day. He still believed she was the same trusting wife he could fool. But every night, while he slept, she worked quietly, gathering proof, setting things aside, planning her escape. She wasn't waiting for his love anymore. She was waiting for the right moment to walk away, with her dignity intact and her heart finally free. A week later, Rachel sat in her lawyer's office again, going over the next steps. They discussed dividing property, her rights, and what to expect. Before Rachel left, her lawyer mentioned something that made her pause. Ethan's company, a large firm known for strict rules, had a clear policy: no romantic relationships between supervisors and their subordinate. If someone broke that rule, it could lead to suspension or even termination. Rachel's mind went quiet for a moment. Ava worked under Ethan. She remembered how he used to talk about mentoring her, how she was so talented for her age. Now the connection made perfect, painful sense. Rachel thanked the lawyer and left, her heart pounding, not with sadness this time, but with clarity. She didn't plan to use this information right away. She wasn't impulsive anymore. She wanted her actions to be deliberate, calm, and final. For the next few weeks, she pretended life was normal. She still cooked dinner, smiled at the right times, and listened when Ethan talked about work. He didn't notice the slight shift in her tone, or how her eyes no longer softened when she looked at him. Ethan seemed lighter lately, maybe because his guilt was fading. He must have believed his secret was safe. Sometimes he even brought home flowers, as if trying to balance his lies with gestures. Rachel accepted them with a gentle smile, her heart detached. She was simply waiting for the right day. Their wedding anniversary arrived on a Friday evening. Ethan surprised her with dinner reservations at a nice restaurant downtown. It had been years since they'd gone anywhere special. Rachel dressed in a soft blue dress, calm and composed. On the way there, Ethan held her hand like old time. She wondered if part of him still felt love, or if it was only guilt pretending to be love. During dinner, he talked about their memories, about how far they'd come. Rachel smiled, nodded, and played along. Inside, she felt strangely peaceful. The man across from her had betrayed her trust completely, yet she wasn't angry anymore. She was done with the pain. She was ready for closure. After dinner, Ethan kissed her cheek and said, "I'm glad we're still us." Rachel looked at him and smiled softly. "Me too," she whispered. He didn't see the quiet truth behind her eyes. When they got home, Ethan went to bed early, saying he was tired. Rachel sat in the dim light of the living room, her laptop open on the table. She gathered everything: photos, the jewelry receipt, screenshots of his messages, everything that proved what he'd done. With steady hands, she composed a short, polite email and attached the files. She addressed it to his company's HR department, and clicked send. No anger, no message of revenge, just facts. Then she closed her laptop, blew out the candle beside her, and whispered to herself, "Happy anniversary." That night, she slept soundly for the first time in months. She didn't need to shout or fight. Her silence had spoken louder than anything else ever could. Within a few days, Rachel could tell something had shifted. Ethan started coming home tense and distracted. He barely spoke during dinner, spending most of the evening pacing or checking his phone. One night, she heard him mutter, "This can't be happening," under his breath. She kept her expression calm, pretending not to notice. By the end of the week, the truth started to show. Ethan came home earlier than usual, his face pale and eyes unfocused. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and sat down heavily on the couch. Rachel looked up from her book, keeping her tone gentle. "Rough day." He ran a hand through his hair. "You have no idea," he said bitterly. "Someone sent something to HR, photos, receipts, messages. They're saying I violated company policy." Rachel's stomach tightened, but she didn't let it show. "That sounds serious," she said quietly. "It's ridiculous," he snapped. "They're overreacting. Ava and I." He stopped himself, realizing too late that he'd just confirmed everything. His shoulders slumped. "They reassigned her," he added, "and they've suspended me until the review's over." Rachel closed her book slowly and nodded. "I'm sorry that happened." He looked at her, maybe expecting comfort, maybe expecting her to ask questions. But she didn't. Her calmness seemed to unsettle him even more. The next few days were silent between them. Ethan stayed home, making phone calls, trying to fix things. Rachel went about her routine as usual, teaching, cooking, reading in the evening. Her heart no longer ached the way it used to. The pain had faded, replaced by quiet strength. One evening, she came home from work carrying a small stack of papers in her bag. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his laptop. She placed the envelope in front of him and said softly, "You should read this." He frowned, opening it. As his eyes moved over the words, his face went pale. "Divorce papers." "Rachel," he said, his voice breaking, "you can't be serious." She nodded once. "I am." He pushed the papers away. "We can work this out. Please. I messed up, I know, but we can fix it." Rachel stood still for a moment, then looked him directly in the eyes. "You ignored me on Valentine's Day, Ethan. But karma doesn't ignore anyone." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His confidence, his charm, all gone. Rachel didn't yell or cry. She just gathered the envelope back into her hand. "I'll give you time to look it over," she said simply. Then she walked out of the kitchen and went upstairs, her footsteps soft and steady. That night, Ethan sat alone at the table, the papers untouched in front of him. For the first time, he was the one waiting in silence. Rachel didn't need revenge anymore. Watching him face the weight of his own choices was more than enough. A few weeks after the divorce papers were signed, Rachel packed her things and moved out of the house she had once called home. She found a small apartment near the coast, nothing fancy but peaceful and full of light. The ocean was only a short walk away, and she loved hearing the waves at night. For the first time in a long while, the silence around her didn't feel lonely, it felt like freedom. The first few days were strange. She would wake up early, expecting to hear Ethan moving around, but there was only the sound of seagulls outside her window. She made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sunrise over the water. Slowly, her body began to relax. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't have to smile for anyone or wait for someone to come home. One weekend, while unpacking, Rachel found an old box filled with her art supplies, brushes, paints, and unfinished canvases. She had once loved painting but stopped years ago because Ethan said it was a waste of time. She stared at the brushes for a long time, then set up a small corner in her living room. That night, she painted for hours. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. With every stroke, she felt something inside her heal. Her best friend, Laura, came to visit often. She brought coffee, snacks, and endless encouragement. "You seem lighter," Laura said one afternoon, watching Rachel paint by the window. Rachel smiled. "I think I am," she replied. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel began painting regularly. She started creating pieces that reflected her emotions: storms, calm waters, sunrises, and quiet strength. Painting became her therapy, her way of letting go of the pain that had once consumed her. A few months later, Laura convinced her to show her work at a small local art fair. Rachel was nervous, but she agreed. She spent the night before carefully framing her best pieces. When people stopped by her booth the next day, they didn't just see paintings, they saw stories. They saw healing. Several people asked to buy her work, and one local gallery owner invited her to display a few pieces. When Rachel got home that night, she cried. Not from sadness, but from pride. It wasn't about Ethan anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finding herself again. She started saving a little money from each painting she sold. Her small apartment slowly filled with warmth. Plants by the window, soft music in the background, and the faint smell of paint in the air. She was building something new, something entirely hers. Every morning, she would walk along the shore, feeling the wind on her face and thinking about how far she had come. She no longer measured her worth by how much she was loved by someone else. She felt proud of herself, for surviving, for growing, and for becoming stronger than she ever thought she could be. Months passed, and Rachel's life kept moving forward, peaceful and full of small victories. She was finally sleeping well, painting daily, and even teaching art classes to children at a nearby community center. One morning, while she was sipping coffee on her balcony, she received a message from an unknown number. It was Ethan. He wrote, "Rachel, I really need to talk. Please, just once." Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something in her heart told her she needed to close that chapter properly. Not with anger, but with finality. She agreed to meet him in a quiet cafe near the old town square, the same place they used to visit years ago, back when things were good. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, looking tired and worn out. His confident smile was gone, replaced by guilt and regret. He stood up when he saw her, eyes full of something she couldn't quite recognize, maybe shame, maybe longing. "Rachel," he began, his voice low, "I messed everything up. I lost my job, my reputation, even Ava left me. I've had time to think, and I realize now what I had with you was real. I miss us. I miss you." Rachel listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. She didn't feel anger anymore. The pain he caused had already burned itself out long ago. What she felt now was clarity. When he finished, she looked at him calmly and said, "Ethan, you ignored me when I gave you love. You made me feel invisible when I was standing right in front of you. I hope now you understand what that feels like." He looked down, his eyes filling with tears. "I was stupid," he whispered. "Can we at least try again?" Rachel shook her head gently. "No, Ethan. I've already tried enough for both of us. Sometimes losing something is the only way to see its value. But I've found peace now, and I can't lose it again." There was no anger in her voice, no desire for revenge, just truth. She stood up, placed a few dollars on the table for her coffee, and gave him one last look. "Take care of yourself," she said softly, then turned and walked away. As she stepped outside, the sun hit her face, warm and bright. She took a deep breath and smiled faintly. The air felt lighter, the world calmer. For the first time, she felt completely free. Behind her, Ethan stayed at the table, staring into the space where she had been. Maybe he finally understood what he had lost, but for Rachel, it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't walking away from something broken, she was walking toward something whole. As she crossed the street, Rachel realized that karma had done its work. She didn't need to seek revenge or prove a point. Life had already balanced itself out. All she needed to do was keep walking forward, with peace in her heart and strength in her soul. Months later, Rachel's life looked nothing like it used to. The pain that once controlled her had faded into something gentler, something like wisdom. Her small apartment by the coast had become a place of peace and creativity. Every morning, she sat by the window with her cup of tea, listening to the sound of the waves, writing in her journal before starting her day. In her journal, she wrote about the lessons she had learned, not out of bitterness, but out of gratitude. One morning, as the sun poured through the curtains, she wrote, "Sometimes love doesn't fail, it's just misplaced. And when we stop chasing the wrong heart, we find our own beating stronger than ever." Rachel had started teaching art classes at a local community center for women who had gone through heartbreak and betrayal. Many of them came in broken and unsure, just like she once was. She would guide them through painting, encouraging them to express their pain, their strength, and their healing through color and shape. Slowly, she watched them find their confidence again. One day after class, a woman stayed behind and said, "You make it look easy, Rachel, like you were never hurt." Rachel smiled softly. "Oh, I was," she replied. "But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means you stop letting the pain define who you are." That evening, Rachel sat alone in her studio, surrounded by her paintings, bright, warm, full of life. She looked at one canvas in particular, a red and gold abstract piece she had finished on Valentine's Day. It represented the day she once cried alone, and the day she later reclaimed as her own. She thought back to that night months ago, the candles, the cold dinner, the silence. But instead of pain, she now felt peace. That day wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a better one. She whispered to herself, "He ignored me on the day meant for love, but I found love again, within myself." As she closed her journal, she smiled. There was no bitterness left, only understanding. Ethan had been a chapter in her story, but she was the author now. Rachel turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of her artwork reflecting on the walls. The woman who once cried quietly beside a man who didn't see her was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and full of purpose. Before going to bed, she wrote one last line that night, a reminder to herself and to anyone who might one day read her words. Never let someone's indifference convince you that you're unworthy of attention. Karma may take time, but it always remembers. With that, she closed her journal, smiled one last time, and drifted to sleep, at peace, whole, and finally free.